They kicked him out of a military hospital because they thought he ate a baby. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. A 14-month-old child went missing from the ward, and the doctors, educated, professional, 18th century physicians, looked at the man in the corner bed, looked at each other, and said, yeah, it was probably him. And they were not wrong to suspect it. Because by that point, this man had already drunk the blood drained from other patients. He had eaten live cats, eels, and snakes whole. He had swallowed a wooden box full of military documents and passed it 2 days later, covered in excrement, and handed it to a French general like it was a perfectly normal Tuesday. Let's go back to the beginning, because Tarrare's story doesn't start in a hospital or a military camp. It starts exactly where you'd expect a story this deranged to start, in the gutter. Tarrare was born somewhere in France around 1772. Nobody recorded the exact date because nobody had any reason to think this child would matter. His family was poor. His family was also, apparently, immediately overwhelmed. Because from the very beginning, Tarrare ate. Not like a hungry child eats. Not like a growing boy with a big appetite eats. He ate in a way that alarmed people, which in 18th century rural France, where everyone was already half-starved, is genuinely saying something. By his early teenage years, he could consume the equivalent of a quarter of a cow in a single day. Not over the course of a week, in a day. His parents could not feed him. They could not afford to feed him. So they did what any loving family would do when their child became a financial and biological impossibility. They threw him out. He was a teenager. He was alone. He was ravenous in a way that had no bottom, no ceiling, and no explanation. So he did the only logical thing available to a starving, unhinged French teenager in the 1780s. He joined a traveling band of thieves, prostitutes, and street performers. And he made his hunger into a show. Now I need you to understand what Tarrare actually looked like, because it matters. Because the physical description of this man is almost as disturbing as his behavior. He was small. Surprisingly small, actually. Slight of frame, unremarkable in height, which made what he could consume even more confounding. When he hadn't eaten recently, his skin was loose. Disturbingly, grotesquely loose. It hung off his body in folds, like something had been inside him that had since departed. His cheeks, when empty, could be stretched outward several inches. His mouth, when fully opened, was extraordinary. The contemporary accounts describe it as capable of opening wide enough to fit a whole apple inside without effort, his jaw seeming to unhinge and expand beyond what anatomy textbooks said a human jaw could do. His body ran hot. Scorching hot. Physicians who later examined him noted that he radiated heat like a furnace, that you could feel warmth emanating from his skin before you even touched him. He sweated constantly, profusely, and the sweat smelled. Not like normal human perspiration. Worse, much worse. We'll get to that. And when he was hungry, which was almost always, his eyes would go strange. Glassy, described one physician. Fixed, like a man watching something the rest of the room couldn't see. Like something behind his eyes had stepped forward and something human had stepped back. This was the creature who stepped in front of crowds in the late 1780s and began his act. What was the act, exactly? I'm glad you asked. I'm also sorry you asked. Tarrare's street performance consisted of eating things that should not, under any biological or moral framework, be eaten. He would swallow stones. Not pebbles, stones. He would eat corks, bottles, whole baskets of apples. He would consume live animals without hesitation and without any visible distress. Snakes, lizards, puppies, eels. He would take a live cat, bite open its abdomen, drink the blood, eat the organs, consume the remainder, and then look at the audience with those glassy, furnace-hot eyes and wait for applause. And people came. People paid. Because humans have never, in all of recorded history, been able to look away from something that makes their stomach turn. Tarrare understood this before he understood almost anything else about the world. His horror was his livelihood. His disorder was his performance. He would work the crowd with a showman's instinct, building to increasingly impossible feats, the coins landing in the dirt at his feet as people recoiled and reached into their pockets simultaneously. But here's the thing about making your pathology into entertainment. The pathology doesn't pause for intermission. Tarrare wasn't performing hunger. He was genuinely, agonizingly, constantly hungry. Between shows, he would raid gutters, butcher shop waste piles, garbage heaps. He haunted the areas outside slaughterhouses, waiting for discarded offal that would have made the slaughterhouse workers themselves gag. He would eat things in states of decomposition that would kill a normal person. His body, whatever was wrong with it, seemed almost impossible to poison through consumption. He ate rotten meat, diseased waste, things that had been dead for days. He didn't die. He was never even particularly ill from it. He just remained hungry. He was, by the time the French Revolutionary Wars began in the early 1790s, a young man of about 17 or 18, rootless and ravenous, wandering France with his performing troupe. Then the army came calling. Not in the recruitment sense, in the collapsing in a military hospital sense. Tarrare arrived at a military hospital sometime around 1792, malnourished in the particular way that only someone who can never actually satisfy their hunger can be malnourished. He had been eating constantly, compulsively, and yet his body was consuming itself. He was skeletal beneath the loose, flapping skin. The army physicians who received him were baffled. They put him on rations. He ate his rations in seconds and then stared at them with those glassy eyes, clearly not even remotely satisfied. So they gave him the rations of 4 men. He ate them. They gave him more. He ate that too. One of the physicians, a man named Dr. Courville, began actually documenting this because he was either a dedicated scientist or he simply could not believe what he was watching and needed to write it down to confirm it was real. Probably both. The hospital staff fed Tarrare a truly extraordinary amount of food. At one documented sitting, he was presented with a meal intended for 15 people and ate all of it, rapidly, without pause, without visible pleasure, without stopping. He ate a wheelbarrow, an actual wheelbarrow of raw offal that was meant to be disposed of. He ate live snakes from the hospital grounds. He was found drinking the blood from patients being treated for bloodletting, crouched at their bedsides in the night. The staff, to their credit, did not immediately discharge him. They were disturbed, yes. They were arguably terrified. But they were also scientists in a revolutionary period who recognized that what they had in front of them was something genuinely unknown. They began running experiments. Tarrare, for his part, seemed almost relieved to be studied. He cooperated. He answered their questions, as best he could, about the hunger that never ceased. He described it as a fire, something always burning inside him that no amount of food could extinguish. Not an addiction, not a compulsion in the psychological sense he could articulate, just a physical reality of his existence. He was always burning, he was always empty. He needed to eat the way the rest of us need to breathe, but the need was never, ever satisfied. The physicians, and here I want to give them some genuine credit before I spend the rest of this story making fun of their decisions, were methodical. They cataloged his physical symptoms: the loose, excessive skin, the abnormal oral cavity, the extreme body heat. They noted that his stomach, when he was hungry, appeared sunken and almost impossibly flat, but that after eating, his abdomen would distend dramatically, swelling outward in a way that seemed almost theatrical. They were observing, they believed, something metabolic, something biological, something real. And then someone in the French military got involved, and everything went completely insane. The man responsible for the next chapter of Tarrare's story is General Alexandre de Beauharnais. He was the stepfather of the future Napoleon Bonaparte, which history has decided is his most interesting characteristic. But I would argue that his decision to look at a man who ate live cats and think spy courier is at least equally remarkable. The logic, such as it was, went like this. France was at war. Communicating with troops behind enemy lines was dangerous. Messengers could be captured. Documents could be seized. But what if, theoretically, a messenger swallowed the documents? What if the documents were placed in a waterproof container and that container was swallowed, carried through enemy territory inside a human body, and then retrieved on the other side? In principle, this is actually not a completely ridiculous idea. There is a long history of human couriers concealing items internally for exactly this reason. Beauharnais' staff explained their proposal to Tarrare. He would swallow a small wooden box containing a letter. He would travel to the French forces operating behind Prussian lines. He would pass the box naturally. And I want to pause here to acknowledge the clinical detachment with which 18th century military planners discussed a man defecating out a spy document and deliver the letter. Tarrare agreed. He may not have had a great many other options. He was, after all, a homeless former street performer currently living in a military hospital and eating the patient's blood. A job offer was a job offer. They tested it first. This is important. They tested it. They were not entirely without caution. They made a box, sealed a test document inside it, and watched Tarrare swallow it. It went down. He stood there. Everyone looked at him. He looked back. The box was inside him. 24 hours passed. The box emerged. The document inside was intact, undamaged. The seal was unbroken. The French military was delighted. They had found their secret weapon. They had found it, and the secret weapon smelled terrible and was currently asking if there was anything to eat. The first real mission was straightforward. Carry a message to a French colonel named Molion, who was being held as a prisoner of war in Prussia. The message was diplomatic in nature, related to prisoner exchanges. Tarrare was dressed as a German peasant. He swallowed the box. He was given a cover story. He walked toward Prussian lines. He was captured almost immediately. In Tarrare's defense, he did not speak German. He was attempting to pass as a German peasant in Germany. This was, in retrospect, a flaw in the plan that perhaps should have been flagged earlier. The Prussians detained him. They questioned him. He stuck to his cover story, or attempted to. The Prussians, unimpressed, decided to make the interrogation more physical. They beat him, extensively and with professional thoroughness. Tarrare did not reveal his mission. This is, genuinely, one of the more impressive parts of this entire story. Whatever else was wrong with Tarrare, he was not a coward. He held under interrogation. He gave nothing up. However, the Prussians were not merely interrogating him about his mission. They suspected he was a spy. They suspected a spy would be carrying something. They kept him. They monitored him. And eventually, nature took its course, and the box emerged, and the Prussians found it. This is the part where I'd like to pause and consider the position of the Prussian soldiers assigned to monitor Tarrare and retrieve the box. I'm going to assume it was not a posting anyone requested. The message was opened. It was, in terms of military intelligence, entirely useless. A routine diplomatic communication that revealed nothing of strategic value. The Prussians read it, looked at each other, looked at Tarrare, looked back at the letter, and presumably felt a deep professional dissatisfaction with the outcome of this entire situation. They brought Tarrare before a general. The general was furious. He threatened to have Tarrare hanged. He did not hang Tarrare. He kicked him out. He released him, apparently concluding that executing a malnourished French oddity who had swallowed a diplomatic non-event was more trouble than it was worth. Tarrare walked, or staggered, having recently been beaten extensively, back toward French lines. He returned to the hospital. He reported his failure. The French military, to their modest credit, decided to cut their losses. The human spy courier experiment was officially over. Tarrare, however, was still there, still hungry, still radiating heat, still deeply, fundamentally wrong in ways that the physicians hadn't yet finished cataloging. This is where the story pivots, where it stops being a dark comedy about military incompetence and becomes something genuinely, unambiguously horrifying. The physicians continued working with Tarrare. They tried everything they could think of to suppress his hunger. Laudanum, liquid opium, did nothing. Soft-boiled eggs, given continuously throughout the day, did nothing. Vinegar, which someone apparently theorized might calm whatever was wrong with his digestion, did nothing. Wine, tobacco, and various other treatments that sound more like a confused party than a medical protocol produced no results. Tarrare remained in the grip of something that 18th century medicine simply did not have the vocabulary to describe, let alone treat. Desperate, the physicians tried something more direct. They would attempt to outpace the hunger through sheer volume. If they fed him enough, perhaps they could find the threshold. Perhaps there was a quantity of food that would finally produce satiation. They fed him extraordinary amounts. It was, the records suggest, like pouring water into a broken vessel. The hunger remained. During this period, Tarrare's behavior in the hospital became increasingly disturbing. He had always been a scavenger, but there is a difference between the creative desperation of hunger and what the staff began observing now. He was found in the morgue, not just once, multiple times, crouched over the bodies of patients who had died, feeding. The nurses who found him described the scene in terms that the historical transcripts record with a kind of formal clinical detachment that somehow makes the image worse. He was caught drinking blood from a bandaged patient. He was discovered consuming medical waste. He ate, according to at least one account, the surgically amputated limb of another patient. The hospital staff, who had up to this point been remarkable in their professional tolerance of Tarrare's condition, were reaching the limits of what their commitment to science could sustain. Their patient, their subject, was consuming their other patients. But the breaking point was not the morgue, and it was not the amputated limb. The breaking point was the baby. A 14-month-old child was admitted to the hospital ward where Tarrare resided. I want to be precise about the age, because the historical records are precise about it, and the precision feels important. 14 months, not even fully walking yet, old enough to have a personality, old enough to have been named, loved, worried over by parents frightened enough to bring their infant to a military hospital. The child disappeared. A 14-month-old child does not get up and leave. A 14-month-old child cannot navigate a hospital ward. The child vanished, and when the nurses searched for the child, they found Tarrare. And the records describe what they observed with a brevity that is somehow more terrifying than a detailed account would be. There were screams. Tarrare was chased from the hospital. He was pursued, and I think the word pursued is doing extraordinary work in the original French accounts because it implies something organized and purposeful that likely was not. He was chased by staff and patients. He was driven out of the building and out of the grounds. The child was never found. Nobody ever explicitly confirmed what happened. The physician's account does not state directly what Tarrare was found doing, but the child was gone. Tarrare was expelled, and the physicians who had spent months studying him, who had approached him as a medical curiosity deserving of scientific treatment, wrote about this incident with a coldness that suggests the scientific detachment had been replaced by something more visceral. He was, from that point forward, no longer a patient. He was something the hospital wanted to be far away from as quickly as possible, in whatever direction would put the most distance between Tarrare and everything the institution contained. And here is where the historical record becomes thin, because Tarrare is no longer being observed by people whose job requires them to write things down. He disappears into France's margins for several years, the same margins he emerged from, the gutters, the waste piles, the slaughterhouse periphery. The same darkness that produced him swallowed him again. What we know is that he reappeared approximately 4 years later, 1798. A military hospital in Versailles, or possibly Strasbourg, the sources disagree. He walked in. He was recognized, or at least identified. He was dying. Tarrare, who had consumed impossible things without consequence for his entire life, was dying of tuberculosis, which is perhaps the most human, the most ordinary, the most darkly ironic ending available to him. Tuberculosis, the Romantic era's most democratic killer. He deteriorated quickly, and when he died, and he did die within weeks of his return, the physicians who attended him did not waste the opportunity. They performed an autopsy. The surgeons made the first incision and were immediately met with a smell. Not the normal smell of decomposition, something worse. The records describe it as an almost unbearable stench of putrefaction emanating from within the body itself. Then they found what was inside. Tarrare's esophagus was enormous. The passage from his throat to his stomach was dramatically, measurably, abnormally wide. The surgeons noted that it was wide enough that, when Tarrare opened his mouth and the throat was viewed directly, you could see directly into his chest cavity. His stomach did not sit where stomachs sit. It had expanded over a lifetime of impossible consumption, until it filled an area that the surgeons described as occupying much of his abdominal cavity. His liver and gallbladder were abnormal, ulcerated, corrupted. They found, in the course of the dissection, a golden fork that had gone missing from the hospital some time before Tarrare's death, sitting inside him. I want to stop and think about that for a moment. A golden fork. Not a small object. A fork that belonged to someone, that had been noticed missing, that had probably been searched for, that was inside Tarrare the entire time. The physicians completed their report. They filed their report. They closed their notes. And Tarrare entered history. Now, here is the part of the documentary where we try to make sense of it. What was wrong with Tarrare? The honest answer is that we don't know. The most discussed modern hypothesis involves a condition called hyperthyroidism, specifically an extreme and uncontrolled version of it. But hyperthyroidism, even extreme hyperthyroidism, does not make people eat live animals. It does not make people swallow forks. There are theories about Klein-Levin syndrome, a rare neurological condition involving compulsive eating and hypersomnia. What all these theories have in common is that none of them are complete. Tarrare remains, in the most literal and medical sense, unexplained. But let me tell you what I think actually matters about Tarrare, because this is the part that I keep coming back to. What I keep coming back to is the image of Tarrare in the military hospital before the darkness set in. A young man, slight, sweating, radiating heat like he's burning from the inside, cooperating with experiments, submitting to examinations, presumably hoping every time that this one would be the answer. He let them run their experiments because he wanted to be fixed. He was not, from all accounts, a monster who took pleasure in what he was. He was a man trapped inside something monstrous. Tarrare died in 1798. He was approximately 26 years old. Nobody knows where he was buried. And then he was forgotten. We live in an era absolutely glutted with content about serial killers. And yet Tarrare, who is more bizarre, more completely inexplicable, went essentially unnoticed for 2 centuries. Because he doesn't fit the narrative. He has no clear motive. He has no manifesto. The last thing I want to leave you with is this. At some point during his time in the military hospital, one of the physicians asked Tarrare what he wanted. Tarrare's answer, as recorded in the medical notes, was quiet and terrible in its simplicity. He said he wanted to not be hungry. He wanted to experience, once, the thing that most people experience every day without thinking about it. The peace of not being hungry. He never got it. Whatever was burning inside Tarrare burned his entire life. And when they opened him up at the end, What they found was exactly what you'd expect to find inside a man who had been burning his whole life. Just ash.